He had always been told that helping someone was a risky business in a galaxy where the stars were vast, the law even vaguer, and the neighbors armed with quantum disruptors who enjoyed polite conversation only when it ended with a body floating in zero gravity. And yet there she was, or had been at least, the one whose long ears had seemed fragile, delicate like crystal rods catching light in a dusty cantina, and whose eyes had held both fear and a strange curiosity, a silent challenge he had never known how to meet. He remembered the day clearly. The cage rattled, the alarms had gone off, and the guard drones looked as confused as he felt. "Open the door," she had said, her voice a whisper that somehow carried over the shriek of electric locks. And he, being the kind of human who could overthink his way through most disasters, had obeyed. He told himself it was the moral thing to do, though his gut had screamed something less philosophical, something along the lines of, "You are about to end up as the galaxy's most wanted idiot." She had slipped past him like smoke, silent but for the soft echo of her boots on the metal floor. Her ears twitched in that familiar, almost comical way, scanning the corridor as if the walls themselves might suddenly shoot a polite but lethal greeting. He tried to joke to himself, muttering, "At least if you're caught, you'll have an excellent story about the human fool who let you go." The humor had sounded hollow even then, mostly because she had smiled in that small, knowing way that made him feel simultaneously triumphant and like a complete idiot. And then she was gone, swallowed by the tangle of corridors, airlocks, and escape tubes that made up the labyrinthine station orbiting a gas giant whose storms could strip paint off a starship in minutes. He had watched her vanish into the artificial fog, convinced he would never see her again, convinced that the memory of her would fade into the mundane problems of starship maintenance, overdue fuel payments, and the occasional sarcastic complaint from his AI assistant, which insisted on calling him Captain Disaster. Years passed, and the galaxy spun indifferent to human fears. He had tried to bury the memory of her in jokes, the kind that didn't quite land. At crowded docking bays, he would mutter under his breath about long-eared fugitives when negotiating cargo deals, prompting suspicious glances from seasoned smugglers who had no patience for metaphors. At the least, the humor kept the memory alive without letting it burn him out completely. The station where he had let her go had long been dismantled for scrap, yet sometimes he swore he saw her face in passing glances at starports, in the twitch of an ear he didn't expect, in the reflection of neon lights across metal hulls. He chuckled once, spilling his synth coffee, muttering to no one, "You've got to stop haunting me in cafes, all right? I'm trying to be human." His AI assistant, who had apparently developed a taste for melodrama, piped up, "Captain, statistically speaking, ghosts do not haunt humans in cafes. Perhaps you are imagining things." He considered pointing out that imagination was one of the few luxuries he still had in a galaxy with no sleep and way too many responsibilities, but he sipped his coffee and let the conversation die. And then she returned, not in some whispered rumor, not as a fleeting shadow, but as a presence that made the hum of the station's energy cores seem almost polite by comparison. He was inspecting a particularly temperamental gravity stabilizer when the voice came, smooth, confident, and just absurdly familiar. "You still spill your coffee at the worst times." He froze, wrench in midair, his tongue suddenly thick with disbelief. Slowly he turned, and there she was, tall, commanding, regal, and infinitely more dangerous than any guard drone he had faced in his clumsy human way. Her ears, long and elegant, framed her face like the tendrils of some cosmic orchid, and yet they twitched with a humor that matched the glint in her eyes. She looked at him with a mix of amusement and purpose, as though she had prepared 1,000 years of revenge, but decided that jokes were far more entertaining. He stumbled over words. I didn't expect, wait, how did you?" His voice cracked somewhere between excitement, fear, and the faint hope that the universe had simply misfiled its sense of irony. She laughed, a sound that rippled like a gentle shockwave through the corridor, bouncing off metallic walls, and somehow deflating the tension he hadn't realized, had knotted him like a badly tied zero-G cord. "Expectations are overrated," she said, tilting her head, her long ears flicking in what might have been mockery or maybe just habit. "And I don't do debts lightly." Her ship was alive in a way that no human vessel had ever been. Walls pulsing with bioluminescent light, corridors that shifted as if the metal itself had moods, and doors that seemed to anticipate his clumsiness before it happened. He tripped over nothing, of course, narrowly avoiding falling into a field that simulated the sensation of walking on clouds. Except it wasn't clouds. It was some experimental gravity matrix that, according to her, taught coordination through mild humiliation. She laughed at his flailing attempts to regain balance, and he muttered, "I should have brought a manual, or at least a helmet." She raised an eyebrow, one long ear flicking, and said, "Manuals are for mortals who fear fun." She explained, between gestures that made holograms swirl around them like liquid constellations, that she had returned not for revenge, but to repay a debt. The debt, it turned out, was older than most star systems, older than the bureaucracy of the Galactic Council, and heavier than the weight of a neutron star compressed into a promise. And yet, she chose to repay it with subtlety, cunning, and the occasional cosmic joke. A holographic decoy that mimicked him singing an old Earth tune, floating harmlessly down the corridors while she observed with a perfectly unreadable smile. He groaned, adjusting the wrench in his hands, muttering, "You could have destroyed a moon, but instead, this is your chosen method of intimidation." She winked, her ears twitching like antennae sensing amusement, and replied, "Fear is for amateurs. Fun is universal." By the time he realized the enormity of the situation, he had already agreed to follow her, stepping through corridors alive with shifting colors and soft hums of alien energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her own confidence. Somehow, between the absurdity, the laughter, and the sheer spectacle of her presence, he felt lighter, more capable, and more alive than he had in years. The galaxy remained vast and indifferent, of course, but now it was populated with possibilities that bent the laws of physics, the patience of AI, and the definition of common sense. And at the center of it all, with long ears catching the light like a crown of living crystal, she walked beside him, a human and an alien debt, a bond formed through chaos, laughter, and a single act of reckless kindness. He had barely caught his breath from the absurdity of tripping over zero-gravity conduits when she appeared at the helm, calm as a nebula yet undeniably alive with authority. The ship hummed around them, alive in ways he could feel in his bones, walls shifting color like auroras caught in a playful dance, lights pulsing with an intelligence he could only suspect belonged to her, or maybe the vessel itself. "I hope you brought more than clumsiness this time," she said, one eyebrow arched, ears flicking with a humor that was impossible to ignore. He tried to answer, failed spectacularly, and instead muttered something along the lines of, "I brought coffee, sort of." She laughed, a sound that ricocheted off the corridors like a minor starquake, and he realized, not for the first time, that she had a talent for making him feel simultaneously heroic and ridiculous. Her ship wasn't just a ship. It was a living argument for why humans should never attempt to run interstellar politics without alien oversight. Doors rearranged themselves to optimize traffic flow. Holograms hovered in midair, responding to gestures he hadn't even thought to make. And the AI he had been paired with had suddenly gone quiet, as if it had sensed someone whose competence far exceeded its database. "Meet your new assistant," she said, pointing to a small orb that rolled along the floor, spinning rapidly like it had just ingested too much quantum sugar. The orb beeped politely, projecting a 3D hologram of what looked like a tiny, extremely judgmental professor. "Professor Quibb," she explained. "He's excellent at pointing out mistakes before they become catastrophic, and yes, he has a sense of humor far superior to yours." He muttered something about being underqualified, and she tilted her head, ears twitching. "We'll work on that," she said, as if the universe itself had agreed to her terms. The first stop was a negotiation with a mining consortium orbiting a volatile gas giant, a planet whose storms could peel the hull off the largest freighters if they weren't careful. He had been briefed, theoretically, but theoretical briefings in the presence of someone who could disarm an entire fleet with a flick of her wrist were almost comically useless. She strode through the negotiation chamber with ease, commanding attention not by raising her voice, but by radiating an authority that made even the most seasoned alien executives fidget in their zero-gravity chairs. He tried to lighten the tension, cracking a joke about the chairs themselves. Gravity seemed to have a sense of irony, causing him to bounce slightly on the way to a console. But she merely gave a subtle, knowing smile. She had seen human clumsiness before, and decided that humor could be a strategic tool. Or perhaps she just enjoyed watching him nearly crash into a negotiation hologram. During a break in the negotiations, she dragged him to the observation deck, a room where stars stretched like rivers of light and comets streaked lazily past in patterns that seemed choreographed. "Do you see it?" she asked. He squinted, expecting some cosmic anomaly or hidden weapon, but all he saw was space doing its usual space thing. "I see stars," he ventured. She laughed, and the sound was as luminous as the comet tails outside. "Yes," she said, "stars. But notice the pattern, the subtle gravitational waves. They tell a story of trade routes, smuggling corridors, even hidden piracy. You humans are blind to them, but they speak in whispers to me." He blinked, trying to absorb the poetry of the cosmos while simultaneously feeling like a squirrel in a physics lecture. "So, you read the stars like interstellar tea leaves?" he asked. She smirked. "Exactly. And you would be the tea leaf," she said, one ear twitching in amusement. "Clumsy, unpredictable, occasionally bitter, but strangely necessary." She introduced him to technology that could have been mistaken for magic, if anyone less scientifically inclined had observed. Ships that folded space upon themselves, cloaking devices that rendered entire fleets invisible until they chose to appear, and energy shields that could absorb meteor impacts like a sponge. He tried one, accidentally activating a holographic projection of himself performing a pirouette while reciting a centuries-old human poem. She raised an eyebrow. "This is exactly why you're the one I chose to keep close," she said, as though the absurdity of the moment confirmed some universal truth. "You remind me that even in power, laughter is essential." Their journey continued through sectors notorious for political instability. Every encounter balanced danger with a subtle comedy that only she seemed capable of orchestrating. Pirates attempted to board, and he panicked, slipping on a gravity field adjustment panel, while she neutralized them with a gesture so subtle it looked like she was swatting an invisible fly. She explained later that the pirates were tested for loyalty, competence, and humor tolerance. "You," she said, gesturing at him, "passed in a way that no human ever could, mostly because they were laughing too hard to fight back." He didn't know whether to be proud or terrified, but he noted that the universe seemed less terrifying when her laughter followed him like an invisible tether. Late into the simulated night cycle of the ship, he found himself in the control chamber, fiddling with systems he barely understood, while she monitored interstellar communications. "You know," he said, leaning against a console, "I always imagined that debt repayment would involve treasure, or power, or at least something that didn't require me nearly electrocuting myself with a quantum stabilizer." She turned, ears twitching, one hand resting lightly on the console. "Debt is less about risk," she said, "and more about learning. You learn courage, you learn ingenuity, and you learn how little gravity you actually need to survive embarrassment." He laughed, nearly toppling over again, and she smiled, clearly entertained by the unintentional comedy of his existence. By the time they approached the neutral star system, where the next phase of her plan would unfold, he had realized that their relationship had shifted. He was no longer simply the human who once set her free. He was a companion, a participant in a game far bigger than himself, one that combined politics, cosmic stakes, and absurd moments of human error that she somehow found endearing. The galaxy, indifferent as ever, seemed to bend slightly around them, as if amused by the pairing of a long-eared alien queen and a clumsy human who spilled coffee on the console with remarkable consistency. And as he watched her silhouette against the glow of distant suns, a thought struck him. He may have freed her once, but in the process, he had bound himself to a destiny far larger than he had ever anticipated, one filled with laughter, danger, and the occasional cosmic prank. The ship sailed onward, alive with humming energy, colors shifting in rhythm with her thoughts, and a subtle promise that even in a galaxy of infinite possibilities, some bonds were inevitable, some debts were unavoidable, and some jokes, particularly those at his own expense, were eternal. By the time they reached the edge of the Andromeda corridor, he was no longer the human who had once opened a cage on a forgotten station. He had tripped over gravity panels, triggered holographic renditions of himself singing poorly, and nearly electrocuted himself with a quantum stabilizer. And yet he had survived every absurdity with a growing sense of competence that surprised him more than anyone else. She walked beside him, long ears twitching with amusement and purpose, a queen in every sense but still carrying that peculiar humor that had kept him grounded in the middle of chaos. "So," he said, brushing dust, or what might have been antimatter residue from his jacket, "we're really doing this, huh? Reshaping politics, diffusing interstellar tensions, and somehow avoiding actual space explosions. I mean, mostly." She smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of lips that carried the weight of entire star systems, and replied, "Mostly. But the universe enjoys a punchline, especially when it involves human ingenuity or foolishness. He decided not to argue. It was safer that way. Their first obstacle came in the form of a rogue fleet blocking the hyperspace route to a critical star system. These ships were enormous, bristling with weapons that could vaporize small moons in moments, and the captains looked like they had never heard of mercy or jokes. He panicked naturally, reaching for controls he barely understood, while she assessed the situation with a calm that could have tamed supernovae. Then, just as the rogue fleet's communications demanded surrender, she leaned close, ears flicking in a way that suggested both mischief and calculation. "Watch this," she said, and the holographic display around them shifted, turning their ship into a dazzling phantom of light, cloaking them with a shimmer that made it look as though they were dancing through the void instead of fleeing from annihilation. He nearly fell backward in relief, mumbling, I think I just became a ghost." She laughed, a sound that turned the void of space into something almost cozy, and added, "You're more than a ghost. You're my accomplice in the universe's sense of humor." As they passed through the fleet, he realized he had changed. The human who had been timid and unsure now moved with a cautious confidence, anticipating outcomes, reading signals, and even cracking one-liners at the most inappropriate moments, which she found both ridiculous and endearing. "You know," he said, watching a holographic map ripple in response to her commands, "I never thought saving someone would make me, well, sort of competent." She tilted her head, ears twitching, and replied, "Competence is the side effect of survival. Humor is optional, but clearly you've excelled." He laughed, nearly tripping over a sliding panel, and she caught him with a single hand, a gesture that was both affectionate and commanding, reminding him that he was still human, fragile, and necessary. They reached the neutral system where the political summit awaited, and he discovered that diplomacy in space was rarely about compromise and almost always about spectacle. The alien dignitaries eyed her with reverence and subtle fear, yet he noticed that she used humor with the precision of a laser scalpel. A poorly timed holographic joke here, a sly pun there, and tensions melted like ice in solar winds. He tried to imitate her style, awkwardly mixing puns about dark matter with exaggerated gestures, and she laughed so hard that a nearby envoy blinked in confusion. Somehow, in that moment, he understood that power wasn't just about dominance. It was about connection, the ability to make even the most cynical beings see the universe in a slightly more human way. The summit concluded with agreements that shifted trade routes, stabilized resource flows, and even introduced a surprisingly effective cultural exchange program that included the teaching of human slapstick as a form of interstellar diplomacy. He had played a part, often by accident, in negotiations that could have failed spectacularly, and yet she never let him forget the value of his mistakes. "Every misstep," she said, long ears catching the light of distant suns, "becomes a story. Every story becomes influence. You, human, are surprisingly persuasive when you stumble convincingly." He laughed because she was right, and because he realized he didn't mind stumbling as long as she was there to catch him. As they left the summit behind, the galaxy stretched ahead with possibilities he had never imagined. He had faced fear, absurdity, and responsibility far beyond what any human should reasonably manage, yet he felt stronger, lighter, and more alive than ever before. Humor had become a shield and a bridge. Mistakes had become lessons and moments of connection. She had repaid her debt not with treasure or favors, but with transformation of him, of the galaxy, and of the bond between them. On the quiet of the observation deck, stars flowing like rivers beyond the transparent hull, he finally spoke without stammering. "I think I get it now. Saving you, it wasn't just about letting you go. It was about letting me find something I didn't know I had." She looked at him, long ears tilting, eyes shimmering with amusement and warmth. "And now," she said softly, "you understand what it means to be part of something larger, something absurdly beautiful, and yes, occasionally dangerous." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words in his bones. The journey home, or wherever the galaxy would carry them next, felt lighter somehow. The debts were settled, the bonds strengthened, and the human who had once acted on instinct alone now understood the subtle art of consequence, humor, and connection. They moved together through the cosmos, a long-eared queen and a once clumsy human, leaving behind chaos, laughter, and the kind of legend that would ripple through star systems as both cautionary tale and cosmic joke. And somewhere between the glimmer of distant suns and the hum of her living ship, he realized that freedom was never just about release. It was about choosing to grow, to stumble, to laugh, and to follow someone who made the universe feel smaller, warmer, and infinitely more intriguing. He looked at her, smiled, and for the first time fully understood that